What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Fallout video, and today I wanted to revisit an older Fallout 76 topic that revolves around whether Bethesda needs a new game engine or not. The big reason I decided to revisit this topic involves the recent Fallout 76 controversy revolving around Fallout 76 players accessing what appears to be the QA smoke test cell in the game. There's a good chance you're likely pretty familiar with this, as it's been talked about to death here on YouTube as of late, but as a quick recap, a bunch of Fallout 76 players through the use of hacks ended up managing to access a series of developer rooms and test cells in the game, which, much like Fallout 4, possess all of the items in the game, including some unreleased ones that are apparently going to come out in later updates for the game. As a result of this happening, Bethesda decided to hand out quote-unquote temporary suspensions to accounts that had visited the developer room via email. The email, which has been showcased by EUROGAMER, contains a request from Bethesda to, quote, describe the way it, referring to the developer room, was accessed in a reply to this email. That detail should provide the information necessary for us to correct any corruption issues on this side and safely release this account and return these characters back into the world. So based on this email, Bethesda is able to detect who went into the test cells or developer rooms. However, or at least at the time, they appeared to be unable to figure out how players are or were actually getting into these areas. What I personally find so insane about all of this is that Bethesda put the development room from Fallout 4, QA Smoke, in the retail version of Fallout 76. Did anyone at Bethesda Game Studios at any point stop to think that that would be a bad idea? And furthermore, if you don't want players to access these areas, why not just remove them from the game rather than getting people to write you an explanation on how they got in? It seems like the former would be a far more productive use of your time, and all I can really say about the latter is, why don't you explain to the community why you left your test cells in an online multiplayer game? I think it stands to reason that if they're there, people are going to attempt to access them just like they have with every other single Bethesda game. What I think this entire controversy speaks to, though, is an idea that's been floating around for quite a while now, in that Bethesda doesn't necessarily need a new engine, as much as they need a significant alteration in their development process and company culture. Granted, this isn't to say that Creation Engine couldn't use some significant upgrades, as Fallout 76's graphics definitely do look dated at times, and Fallout 4's animation systems were dated at the time of that game's release. But I think the core of the issue revolving around Bethesda's game engine ultimately lies with the priorities of the company itself, rather than the quality of the engine itself. As an example, Bethesda has been known for years to have issues with long-established bugs in their games, and rather than put together a team to go in and attempt to clean up a lot of those bugs, Bethesda has traditionally relied on the modding community to do this for them, with popular mods like the unofficial patches for Skyrim and Fallout 4 coming to mind. In the case of Skyrim, you would think that for Skyrim's re-releases via Special Edition or the Switch versions of the game, that someone at Bethesda would have taken a look at some of the unofficial patch team's work and maybe incorporate some of those fixes to the game in addition to the new graphical elements that Bethesda themselves added. Yet it seems no one did that, and Skyrim was mostly re-released as is, unchanged from Skyrim patch 1.9. The thing is, Bethesda could go back and squash a bunch of those bugs, yet they choose not to. And ultimately, I think that comes down to them having other priorities, because the knowledge of what to patch or fix is pretty well documented at this point. Especially in the case of Skyrim and Fallout 4, where there are entire wiki pages dedicated to documenting all of the bugs that are in those games. Transitioning back to Fallout 76 for a second, think about the patch that added Ultrawide support for the game. It was heavily criticized due to how it appeared that Bethesda had simply performed an INI edit with the UI elements and text stretching like they would have without a proper patch. As many, I think, rightly questioned at the time, was this really the best that Bethesda could muster? Especially since Bethesda had a month to implement this fix and a modder had managed to properly scale the UI with significantly less resources available to them than Bethesda has. If you ask me, it all goes back to company priorities, which don't seem to be in line with what would actually be the best thing for Bethesda's games, and by extension, Bethesda themselves. After all, even if you're someone that disagrees with me and you like Fallout 76, you can't deny that having proper ultrawide support on the PC version would be better for the game and Bethesda themselves, rather than the lazy fix that was ultimately implemented. Let's go back to the whole test cell/developer room controversy for a moment. If you were a developer that was trying to implement good development practices for your online game, you would remove a room like QA Smoke from the retail build of your game to ensure that players can't access it. With that in mind, it stands to reason that QA Smoke and the other test cells in Fallout 76 didn't get removed during development due to company priorities, which, as I've discussed before while mentioning the Ultrawide fix, those company priorities don't seem to be in line with what would actually be the best thing for Bethesda's games and Bethesda themselves. The point I'm trying to make here is that while the underlying technology of Bethesda's games may have limitations, as I suspect many game engines do, after all, we hear a lot about how EA and DICE's Frostbite engine is terrible for RPGs, I think the issues many of us see and experience with Bethesda's games are more so the result of Bethesda's priorities rather than major faults with the creation engine itself. After all, it's up to Bethesda to remove test cells from their games. The creation engine can only do what Bethesda tells it to do. There's an old article that came out from the ESCAPIST a while back that I think is still relevant to this discussion that's simply titled, "Bethesda Doesn't Need a New Engine." A few parts of the article in particular really stood out to me, which read as follows. Bethesda is now in control over their own engine, and their engine is notoriously buggy. This leads many people to conclude that Bethesda should throw the whole thing away and start over. People say it in print, they say it in YouTube videos, and they say it often in comments. This is an understandable reaction, and I understand why people have it. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. If the engine is full of bugs, then replacing the engine should get rid of the bugs. Sadly, it's not that simple. This isn't a technology problem, this is a problem with the company culture, and those kinds of problems are a lot harder to correct. The problem isn't the bugs. Every game has bugs while it's being developed. What counts is how you deal with them, and I suspect Bethesda's bug-fixing machinery is neglected and broken. Either management doesn't care, or the leadership doesn't know how to correct their process. Whatever the cause of the dysfunction, Bethesda's janky engine is a symptom of the problem, not the cause. If management put a priority on fixing their development process and was willing to spend money to make sure the software was stable, then it would happen. Bethesda employs smart people, the job could get done. If management isn't willing to take those steps, then a new engine would turn out exactly like the current one. Given a lot of Bethesda's weird behavior recently, I think this article is definitely onto something. The problems with Bethesda's engine seem to be more of a symptom of company priorities, culture, and business interests, rather than the underlying technology. And come to think of it, I think there may be some truth to the points that this Escapist article lays out, in that Bethesda was somehow able to come up with a solution for the physics being tied to framerate bug for Fallout 76. I'll leave this ALTCHAR article in the description for reference, but Bethesda was somehow able to figure out how to patch or correct the physics tied to framerate issue that has been associated with their games for years. What that suggests to me is that Bethesda has always had the capability to fix things like this, yet it didn't become a priority until a bunch of people online made us think about it during Fallout 76's beta. Admittedly, I don't know the ins and outs of Creation Engine, and what Bethesda may have done here may have only been a slight workaround to achieve better physics at higher frame rates, but the fact that something like this seems possible makes you wonder why it hasn't been implemented in any of Bethesda's previous games. After all, people have been playing at 144Hz for years and would have liked, say, Skyrim Special Edition or Fallout 4 to be playable at higher frame rates without the physics problems. If you ask me, I think it all comes back to company priorities, which, as we've said before, they don't appear to be in line with what would be best for Bethesda's games and Bethesda themselves. And I think, as it was pointed out in the Escapist article, Bethesda's issues with bugs are a symptom of a much deeper problem that's going to be a lot harder for the studio to correct. Especially since this Todd Howard quote from back in June of last year may indicate that Bethesda is set in their current ways. For Fallout 76, we have changed a lot. The game uses a new renderer, a new lighting system, and a new system for the landscape generation. For Starfield, even more of it changes, and for the Elder Scrolls 6 out there on the horizon, even more. We like our editor, it allows us to create worlds really fast, and the modders know it really well. There are some elementary ways we create our games, and that will continue because that lets us be efficient, and we think it works best. Maybe Bethesda can and will change their ways given a lot of the fallout, no pun intended, surrounding Fallout 76. However, what I think we can say for sure is that it's going to likely be very difficult for Bethesda to do so. Especially since Bethesda have so much history with following a certain process and how they've relied on their modding community for so long. Going into the future, Bethesda would need to prioritize bug fixing, which I think they could do. It's just the question is, will they do it? At the end of the day, while the creation engine likely does have its own set of limitations, as it would probably be a bad idea to try to make a racing game in the creation engine, I think the issues a lot of us have been seeing for so long in Bethesda's games are the result of company priorities more so than the actual quality of the game itself. And hopefully, Bethesda can make some necessary changes. Alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up this video. I know the whole dev room situation has been talked about pretty thoroughly at this point, but I wanted to give my own 2 cents on it, plus discuss how it could pertain to the whole situation surrounding Bethesda's engine, as well as for their future games. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more videos, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.